One of the central themes discussed inside the Graveland limos is the illusory happiness brought on by great fame and wealth. Stop after stop present us with harrowing examples of just how mistaken this belief ends up being for a great number of families, from Howard Hughes to the Menendez brothers to Michael Jackson. But fewer fables illustrate this illusion quite as poignantly as the tragic death and life of the late legendary singer Marvin Gaye. In tonight's Fireside Chiller, we will explore the infamous murder of the R&B impresario by his own father, Marvin Gaye Sr. However, we also argue that the filicide was not a sudden, unexpected occurrence. Rather, it was the eventual, inevitable result of decades of misery and troubles endured by Marvin, a cold manifestation of the harsh reality that even all the money and celebrity in the world cannot solve every problem. Welcome to our Fireside Chiller. We are about to dig into the dark story of Marvin Gaye's personal tragedies and untimely death. But first, the requisite and somewhat annoying solicitation to like, comment, and subscribe. Actually, your subscription does more than just help to get our channel out to other purveyors of the sick, twisted, and paranormal. It actually helps to keep our small business going. There's not a lot of us left in the non-internet world known as land, and we love what we do so much, and our lovely subscribers help to sustain our tour operations here in LA. So please like, comment, or subscribe if you like our content and want to see more, and also to keep our funeral limousines exporting true crime from the world's looniest city to our wonderful mourners. Okay, now back to Marvin. Marvin Pence Gaye Jr. was born in 1939 in Washington, D.C. to Marvin Gaye Sr., a preacher, and Alberta Cooper. Marvin Jr. was the second of 4 children that the couple had together. The sect of Christianity which Marvin Sr. belonged to, the House of God, which is still active today, has some pretty specific takes on traditional Christianity. First, it focuses heavily on the laws of the Old Testament, with a belief that the Mosaic laws and 10 Commandments are binding for Christians as well as Jews. As a result, the House of God draws from elements of Orthodox Judaism, like the Saturday Sabbath and kosher dietary restrictions. The leader of the church, the chief apostle, wears a mitre hat embroidered with a Star of David. Secondly, while classical Christianity places great emphasis on the life to come, the House of God employs a more Pentecostal approach, focusing on spiritual experiences in the here and now. Followers practice tarrying, where they repeat a mantra until the Holy Spirit enters into them and sets them speaking in tongues. Unfortunately, Marvin Sr. was a troubled man. In addition to having been the victim of physical childhood abuse, Marvin Sr. was an alcoholic and cross-dresser. Trim and effeminate, he used to wear women's blouses and wigs. It's not clear whether Marvin Sr. was homosexual, but he was extremely open with his cross-dressing. The entire community knew about it. As a result of being teased so frequently by other kids about his dad's proclivities, Marvin Jr. added an E to his surname as a teenager, as though to disclaim, "Gay the name, not the homosexual." After being passed up for chief apostle, Marvin Sr. quit the church altogether and never really returned to work. The family of 6 lived in the projects and were supported entirely by Alberta's work as a maid. As full-time dad, Marvin Sr. terrorized his children. The Gay household was infused with the prohibitions of the House of God. There were no sports, dancing, movies, TV, or pop music. The 2 girls were forbidden to wear sleeveless dresses, nylons, lipstick, nail polish, or open-toed shoes. And every Friday afternoon through midday Sunday was strictly for observing the Sabbath. If one of the children did not correctly recite the appropriate Bible verse, they were beaten. All 4 children developed bedwetting problems. Marvin Jr. was the target of Marvin Sr.'s ire, his literal whipping boy of choice. Alberta Gay recalled, "My husband never wanted Marvin, and he never liked him. He used to say that he didn't think he was really his child." Between the ages of 7 until his mid-teens, Marvin Jr.'s life seemed to become a series of brutal whippings. He'd later explain,
"It wasn't simply that my father beat me, though that was bad enough. He'd say, 'Boy, you're gonna get a whipping.' Then he'd tell me to take off my clothes and send me to the bedroom. It wouldn't have been so awful if he had hit me right away. But father liked mind games. He'd play with me. He'd make me wait an hour or even more, all the while jangling his belt buckle loud enough so I could hear. When he finally struck me, I knew, children know these things, that something inside of him was enjoying the whole thing.
For most of his life, Marvin suffered from chronic bouts of depression. His refuge within his father's home was a piano in the living room. As long as he played religious music, Marvin Sr. encouraged Marvin Jr. to play. Sure enough, the one pursuit he was permitted became Marvin's path to greatness. It took him a number of years and a brief stint in the Air Force, but Marvin steadily worked his way to success, and in 1962, 23-year-old Marvin had his first of many top 10 hits. With such a tumultuous early life and so much pain bottled up, Marvin pioneered a new type of music which broke free from the conventional jazz, blues, and doo-wop influences he grew up with. As his art evolved, Marvin ushered in a new innovative genre of R&B and soul that challenged existing limits of the music, infusing it with deeper, deliberate meaning. In 1967, Gladys Knight's I Heard It Through the Grapevine topped the Billboard chart. Marvin had actually recorded his version first, but the record company was skeptical that his edgy psychedelic take on the song would not be well received, so they shelved the record until Knight's cover found success. After Marvin's came out, it was Motown's biggest hit of the 1960s. In 1971, Marvin released the single What's Going On. One critic wrote, Marvin's new kind of soul music came from the soul itself. Marvin's question, What's Going On, was to black music what Bob Dylan's How Does It Feel had been to rock and roll a half-decade earlier. Gay signed a $1 million record deal with Motown, worth about $8 million in 2025. He gave his father a new Cadillac. When asked whether Gay Sr. was grateful, the singer said,
Not especially.
Unfortunately, fame was not particularly therapeutic to Marvin. Like his father, Marvin grew to have complex feelings about women. He told his biographer,
I'm the last of the great chauvinists. I like to see women serve me, and that's that. In my second wife's case, serving me meant feeding my fantasies, my evil fantasies.
Marvin's early encounters with drugs mostly consisted of the occasional escapades with marijuana, then illegal. But as his success and income grew, these were eventually supplanted by a hardcore cocaine addiction. Even with his touring and record royalties, Marvin was constantly in debt from his insane drug use and reckless spending habits.
How much have I spent in toot over the years? I don't want to know. Enough to certify me as a fool. You'd have to call me a drug addict and a sex freak.
Performing did not provide Marvin with much relief or satisfaction. He had terrible stage fright, which he medicated using extra coke, and struggled to keep up with the physical demands of being a performer on the road. By the 1970s, Marvin toured solely to pay off his mounting sea of debts, clearly not helped by his habit. Financial obligations piled up, a divorce lawsuit from his first wife Anna, a 5-acre estate in Hidden Hills, a neo-Tudor mansion for his parents in Arlington Heights, oceanfront property in Jamaica, 14 luxury cars, a speedboat, small yacht, RV, couple of tractors, an interest in an NBA team, several professional boxers, and building an elaborate recording studio on Sunset Boulevard, complete with a residential suite with a king-size waterbed and industrial-sized hot tub. On top of these, an ex-manager claimed Marvin owed him $2 million, and 4 musicians sued him for hundreds of thousands in back pay. The IRS were pursuing him for $2 million in unpaid taxes. He was physically violent with his first wife, Anna, in a marriage that lasted about 6 months. When the couple failed to conceive a child, Marvin pressured Anna to fake a pregnancy in the months before they adopted a son because he was afraid news of an adoption might imply a lack of sexual adequacy on his part. Overwhelmed by his mounting debts, failing marriage, and his drug habits in 1969, Marvin barricaded himself in an apartment and threatened to shoot himself. His father-in-law was able to talk him out of it. The 1973 iconic hit Let's Get It On was inspired by the first moment Marvin set eyes on Janice Hunter, his second wife, during a recording session. But love did not come as easily to Marvin as his creation of this song might imply. Along with cocaine, Marvin suffered from an addiction to pornography. During his marriage to Janice, who was just 16 when they wed, Marvin solicited her to indulge his sexual fantasies. He wanted her to have relations with other men so that she could tell him the sexual details of each affair. Janice grew extremely reluctant, but Marvin would have his way. However, anytime she obeyed him, Marvin grew so outraged that he became physically violent with her too. At the end of 1979, Gay flew to Hawaii to live in a van on the beach while he had
one long nervous breakdown.
Completely cleaned out of funds, Marvin begged his old friends Smokey Robinson, Stevie Wonder, and Wally Amos to lend him some money. He also called his mother and asked her to hawk some diamonds he had given her and send him the cash. Giving up completely, Marvin snorted an ounce of cocaine in an hour, called his mother to say goodbye, but did not die. When Janice flew there to try and help him to recuperate, Gay took a knife to her heart.
I wanted to kill her. I almost did. I wanted to kill myself, but I didn't have the guts.
Marvin often referred to his own death wish and his inability to fulfill it out of cowardice. After 9 months, Marvin came back to LA. He agreed to a European tour in 1981 to help pay off some of his creditors, then stayed in Europe for 3 years to avoid the IRS. In Europe, Marvin began an affair with a groupie named Eugenie Vis, whom he had met after a concert in Amsterdam. When they first made love, Vis had high expectations from the sex symbol. However, she said Marvin made love without any feelings of warmth. When she began to cry, he went impotent. Vis also recounted that Marvin introduced her to group sex and voyeurism and liked to role play with a whip. After taking years longer than he promised Motown Records to produce his In Our Lifetime album, the label simply released the unfinished record without his approval. In 1982, Motown sold the Gay contract to CBS Records. In the final years of his life, Marvin began to visibly unravel. During interviews in Europe to promote his new album, Marvin openly smoked cocaine. When asked by one journalist how he wished to be remembered, Marvin replied,
As one of, if not the greatest artists to walk the face of the earth.
in another interview with his future biographer David Ritz, Marvin's apartment was so strewn with sadomasochistic magazines and other kinky pornography that the writer suggested Marvin needed sexual healing. That phrase struck Marvin as a great song refrain, and in a rare lucid moment wrote a slow reggae-style song that was hurriedly released by CBS. Sexual Healing became one of the best-selling soul hits of all time. While running the press junkets for his new album, Marvin presented himself as a smooth, suave Casanova.
What people need is to live out their sexual fantasies. Everybody would be happier and less crazy if they could do what they wanted to sexually.
Marvin seemed to follow this cue, but it did not make him seem either any happier or less crazy. One member of the Sexual Healing Tour went on to say, there was more coke on that tour than on any other tour in the history of entertainment. Marvin's behavior grew increasingly erratic and bizarre. Seemingly obsessed by sex, he invited 5 or 6 men and women at a time to have sex in his room while he watched. Teams of armed security guards stood watch at the hotel room door. Certain that someone had been hired to assassinate him, Marvin had bodyguards accompanying him everywhere he went and wore a bulletproof vest whenever he was not on stage. On stage, he started to perform a striptease to his briefs during the Sexual Healing number and show finale. Marvin survived that tour just barely, virtually collapsing at his parents' house back in LA. His Hidden Hills Palace was sold to help pay down some of his debts. His parents' house near Arlington Heights was a full one. In addition to Marvin and his parents, Marvin's little brother Frankie and his wife lived in an adjacent guest apartment. While Marvin Sr. spent the days holed up in his room drinking vodka, Marvin Jr. spent them holed up in his room watching porn and freebasing cocaine. Alberta often cried over his behavior, to which Marvin would say,
Mother, this is the last time, I promise.
It never was. As his paranoia grew, he also began stockpiling guns around the house. He had bought one for Marvin Sr. for his own protection against intruders. Marvin regularly had drug dealers over to the house as well as groupies and both his ex-wives, with whom he had rekindled sexual relationships. But he also beat them again too. At the end of March, in a third apparent suicide attempt, Marvin jumped out of a moving car. Marvin's junior and senior, who had not lived together for decades, warred constantly. They fought over everything. If it was not about Marvin Jr.'s drug use, promiscuity, or porn addiction, they fought over Marvin Sr.'s neglectful treatment of Alberta, emotionally and economically. Even when they were not fighting, the tensions in the house were so high that Marvin Sr. told his daughter Jean, "If he touches me, I'll kill him." On March 31st, 1984, Marvin Sr. flew into a ridge in Alberta when he was unable to locate an insurance document. That next day at about 12:30 p.m., still angry, he yelled up at her from the bottom of the stairs while she was in Marvin Jr.'s room. Marvin came out and yelled back,
If you have something to say to her, come up here, say it to her face.
Marvin Sr. then stormed up the stairs and came into Marvin's room. Marvin Jr. leapt up off the bed and forcefully shoved Marvin Sr. into the hallway, causing him to fall and kicking him. Alberta followed and attempted to break up the fight. Marvin Jr. went back to his room and sat on his bed, but Marvin Sr. walked over to his room and returned after a few moments. He raised his hand towards his son, brandishing the .38 Smith & Wesson he'd given him, and fired it into Marvin's heart. He fell off his bed onto the floor. Marvin Sr. walked closer and fired again point blank into his son's shoulder. Frankie ran in while his wife called 911. As Marvin lay dying in Frankie's arms, Frankie heard him whisper,
I got what I wanted. I couldn't do it myself, so I made him do it. It's good. I ran my race. There's no more left in me.
Marvin Gaye Jr. was rushed to California Hospital where he could not be resuscitated and pronounced dead at 1:01 p.m. on April 1st, 1984, one day before his 45th birthday. His autopsy found both cocaine and PCP in his system at the time of death. Around 10,000 people attended Marvin's funeral, which was led by the chief apostle of the House of God. His old Motown friend Stevie Wonder sang, and Smokey Robinson spoke. Marvin was buried like a prince in one of his costumes from his final tour, a gold and white military-style uniform with an ermine wrap around his shoulders. A week after the slaying, Marvin Sr. told the LA Herald-Examiner, "I do know that I did fire the gun. I was just trying to keep him back off me. I want the world to know it wasn't presumptuous on my part." To the question of whether he loved his son, Marvin Sr. replied, "Let's say that I didn't dislike him." He was charged with murder but was allowed to plead guilty to voluntary manslaughter instead, a bargain based on his age of 70, the physical assault from Marvin Jr., and the fact that Marvin Jr. was high. At sentencing, the judge, Gordon Ringer, proclaimed, "This is one of those terribly tragic cases in which a young life was snuffed out, but under the circumstances it seems to be agreed by everybody, including the very able and experienced investigating officers in this case, that the young man who died tragically provoked this incident, and it was all his fault." Then Marvin Sr. spoke, "If I could bring him back, I would. I was afraid of him. I thought I was going to get hurt. I didn't know what was going to happen. I'm really sorry for everything that happened." Ringer sentenced Marvin Sr. to a 6-year suspended sentence and 5 years of probation and banned him from drinking or owning a gun. Marvin Sr. and Alberta divorced after 49 years. He moved into the Inglewood retirement home. Alberta died of bone cancer 3 years after Marvin Jr.'s death. Marvin Sr. died in 1988 of pneumonia. In 2001, Frankie died of a heart attack. At the time of Marvin Jr.'s death, he still owed his first wife $293,000 and the IRS $1.6 million in back taxes. Today, his is one of the top earning estates for deceased celebrities. Headlines pronounced Marvin Gaye Jr. murdered by his father, and objectively he was. But closer examination of the details of the crime scene and circumstances of Marvin's life show that a part of him harbored a death wish. He had attempted suicide on 3 previous occasions, the last one just 4 days before his death. Marvin arrived in this life with an exquisite gift of great artistic talent and a beautiful soul. But he was also dealt a very rough hand in his shattered childhood and all the pain he endured from his cruel father, which became a lifelong handicap for him. Despite celebrity and enormous wealth, Marvin could never quite evade his demons. Actually, the pressures brought on by his fame and the means his money gave him to fuel a drug addiction deepened his depressions and only enhanced his misery. Marvin knew that his father would retaliate if Marvin ever attempted anything physical. Quote, "I brought you into this world," Marvin Sr. used to say, "I can take you out." In the final situation of his life, the jaded, broke, alone, exhausted, and addiction-plagued Marvin decided to redeem his father's promise to him, perhaps returning to the man who kept him immiserated his whole life to provoke him to deal that one final blow. Ironically, the blow that finally set Marvin free felt natural. It was almost as though after 45 years of doing battle, Marvin Jr. finally surrendered to Marvin Sr., begging him to make good on his terrible threat. At last, Marvin Gaye turned his oppressor into his liberator.
And I'm going to give to you now before these cameras and for these people. I think you're one for myself. As long as I know you have a humble mind, and as long as you know there's a guard upstairs, you can call on him and respect the people. I think you're a real wonderful person. I'm going to give that to you as my son. And I'm proud of you, really am.
Thanks for joining this week's Fireside Chiller. If you found our chiller thrilling and want to see more on all things LA and macabre, by all means subscribe to our channel. Follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok for great gruesome content. And be sure to sign up for your free LA Crimes delivery at www.graveline.rip. Next time you're in Los Angeles, don't forget to book your space on our Graveline Tours funeral limo service. And above all, remember, you only die once.